Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Power Platform Community Conference sponsor webinar series. I'm delighted to be joined by our sponsor, HSO. I'm Ella Fernandez, head of the connections at BTechly. Today, our speakers will walk us through extending your ERP with Power Platform. But before we begin, a few housekeeping reminders. Participation in the live Q&A webinar registration requires webinar registration. So if you're joining us through other channels, please register by scanning the QR code on your screen or by visiting btechly.com. Select today's session and enter your business email address. Once you're registered, you'll receive a calendar invite with a link to join the Q&A part because it's not going to be live stream. If you're not yet registered to our Power Platform Community Conference, this is a great time. That's happening on October 27th to 29th in Las Vegas. Be sure to register by scanning the QR code on your screen or visit powerplatformconf.com. Don't forget to use the code BOGO, BOGO, for a buy one, get one free pass. And of course, please like, subscribe, follow both BTechly and Power Platform Community Conference. Without further ado, let's kick things off and enjoy today's learning experience.
All right. Thank you, Ella, and thank you, Power Platform community. Today we'll be looking at extending ERP with Power Platform. We're going to look at some business scenarios and industry use cases to really help you take advantage of your investment in Power Platform and your ERP platform, looking today at Dynamics 365. So with me today, there we go. It's like Ella mentioned, I'm Martin Bogus, I'm Vice President of Manufacturing Supply Chain for HSO. And with me today, I have Paul Way, one of our enterprise architects from our Power Plat team.
How's it going?
So hopefully today, what we're trying to accomplish is everyone's going to learn some benefits of extending ERP with Power Plat, like what we think about it, kind of HSO's opinion on kind of ERP modernization and why we think Power Plat is an important part of that. We're going to look at some industries use cases and kind of what they do and some common business scenarios. And then Paul's going to talk a little bit about how the path to success, how to look for opportunities, and how to kind of build a successful Power Platform delivery model. So one of the things we're researching, the concept of why extend your ERP, fundamentally, you look at data around only about 20% of the market really gets more than half the value of ERP. And we see this all the time in our ERP practice around driving into what do people expect to get from it? What do they actually get into it? And why don't they get further? And then I think when you get into that, around why, sometimes it's not aligned to the business, sometimes not aligned to the user, sometimes just adoption. We're going to look at how we address some of those things with Power Plat today. I think also we get into the breaking up monolithic applications. I know Paul works quite a bit in this around, we've got legacy apps, whether they're built out in any number of systems. How do we migrate away from this concept of monolithic apps and break these apart into more bespoke solutions or more native cloud? I know, Paul, you work a lot in Power Plat. There's just some savings of just using Power Platform even by itself without ERP, right?
Absolutely. And so that's when one great outcome of leveraging Power Platform is the time savings that happen at a company level, department level, key around core processes, or even just kind of the personal level from a hyper personalization of how it can bring individual productivity. And along with that, companies see revenue growth that's associated where they're making a better experience, customer experience, which is yielding, kind of a higher revenue growth associated.
And I think that aligns to some key priorities, especially we see from manufacturing and distribution side, are really around what people are wanting to do in the next, couple of years. Improve agility, which again, having that flexibility, both quickly developing apps or citizen development is part of it. Getting better decision making, again, driving that. Paul, you're going to talk about automation and workflow through that. And I think the last thing, time to value, speed, but also cost reduction. And again, that's why we believe so strongly in the Power Platform. We'll look at how that fits, in your ERP world. So I think it's good to kind of look at why we're talking about ERP. And for us, it's like when you move ERP to the cloud, you've kind of changed the model quite a bit. And especially in modern ERP, whether it's Microsoft E365 or even other cloud ERPs, the big thing here is now it's your cloud base. There's no more sitting on the same version for 5, 10, sometimes 15 years we see sometimes. You have this constant rapid deployment. You have upgrade process. And now you're seeing with Microsoft heavily invested in embedding AI. So some of these things mean like you have to kind of keep up with the pace, which makes you rethink the way you do process change, leveraging more out of the box, minimizing customizations, and really starting to think about if we need to do something unique, do we need to do it in a different way? And kind of the final point is like that time to value. When you move to cloud, the biggest thing is we really want to drive ROI. We want to improve efficiencies. We want to get it a lot faster. But I think as we tie this together, we're really looking at how do we do these things and what's the right platform to potentially still extend to ERP, customize it for the users, but do it in a way where it doesn't block this cloud innovation that we've invested in so heavily. So that kind of leads us up to why Power Platform. Now, Paul, you've been recommending this for a number of years around stop doing customizations to ERP, leverage a Power Platform. Why do you believe so strongly in this is the right approach for extending your ERP?
Yeah, and it goes back to kind of what you were just mentioning of where, whether Microsoft or any other ERP, vendor, the functionality continues to grow. Especially we see that within the Microsoft side, which is great gains and productivity. It kind of comes along with the platform. And so it's important that you stay current, you stay with what's there. You can position yourself in a way that can leverage some of the AI capabilities, for example, that continue to kind of roll out. So but at the same time, you need a balance that you need certain processes, kind of have your secret sauce. And so being able to kind of live in both worlds where you can, offload some of this work into Power Platform, give yourself kind of that custom capability, all in a low-code fashion that makes it easier to maintain, cheaper to maintain, really is kind of providing you the best of both worlds of where you're able to kind of extend the capabilities of what your ERP system is doing and keep everything synchronized throughout.
I think the great thing here too is because you're building off, the data model and directly, you're not inhibiting any upgrades or taking on new features, especially as Microsoft again is releasing all this fun new stuff with AI. You can take advantage of that. You're not blocking yourself like you did in the past of those heavy customizations embedded directly in the ERP. Exactly. So it doesn't remove it entirely, but it really gives you a different approach, and it really should be the starting point when you think around, modernize or extending or again customizing from the ERP, especially in Dynamics world. So let's look at some common business scenarios. I think this is where we see a lot of our customers struggle with is like, where do I start? What are the best places to look at? What's the most low-hanging fruit or the best time to value? Some things we can go address, whether extending ERP or just Power Apps in general. So we're going to look at some things that we like to, I know, Paul, you kind of trying to say these underserved frontline workers and kind of some people that maybe are not full users in a traditional ERP perspective, but maybe add points of data or data that sometimes gets lost in the process. So we're going to look at some examples around shop floor, some inspections, some different things that we've seen there and talk about that. We look at the very traditional ERP users, like from a back office perspective, your AP and supply chain management people. And then we're going to look at something a little different around just user experience and some of the things we see around maybe not extending, but really changing the process flow to map to the way that people works. So let's kick off with shop floor. One of the things that is important, like there's a lot of out-of-the-box functionality when you get to the ERP around core transactions, production, warehousing, normal things. But the thing I like around when you go looking for areas on shop floor for great places to automate with Power Apps is the type of work. It's very task-based. It's very specialized. You have sometimes people that do one thing. They do quality control. They do, receiving at the dock. You get to very task-oriented, and you get into great place to have a very personalized experience into what they do. And I think the other thing is there's a lot of data that's captured on the shop floor that's not really used in anything. A lot of times we'll still see paper, we'll still see smart forms, we'll see a lot of things where you're capturing data, and not all that actually needs to go to the ERP. Some of it is really for the process of managing the floor, but some of it ends with the transaction in ERP. So we're going to look at a couple of different scenarios that we think make the most sense if you're looking at shop floor and leveraging Power Apps from that perspective. So we're going to kick off with inspections. Paul, we've done this one for years, right? Like it's been a very common one, in a couple of different scenarios. But again, it's task oriented. You want survey type questions. There could be multiple different versions of it, but it's great because we can streamline a process that's very typical, whether it can be inspections around equipment, inspections around safety and facilities. But the thing that's great here is, again, all those rich text areas, right? And different capabilities to capture data.
Yeah, and this is one that's very positively received, just because it's companies tend to have tried sometimes to digitize, maybe have struggled for whatever reason, but with the Power Platform, being able to kind of give that the custom scenario of what that form needs to be in a way that's a little bit smarter too, is kind of a bit of a game changer for many, of where now they can actually kind of interact. And be able to enter in the information. Not to mention with Power Automate, actually being able to bring in sometimes external data that they just really hadn't been able to do before. Yeah. So a lot of times we can actually make the process significantly faster because we're getting readings, we're having other aspects kind of come in instead of the constant manual entry and then getting to a computer and doing entry again. It can be a much better experience just kind of entering on a mobile device.
Yeah, I think I enter on mobile, enter it once, and then through Power Apps we can send it. Maybe it's in part in the ERP, and part maybe somewhere else in a CMMS system or whatever else you have on the floor. Again, that concept to make it easy for those users, those frontline workers, to leverage Power Apps is the way they work. I think another one, even though you think, typical inventory control, stock control is something that's, typically managed from an ERP perspective, we still see a lot of use cases around, different types of users and their types of interaction. I know, Paul, this is one we've done a lot of really changing the format and really looking at it around adjusting and transferring, and also taking what potentially is multiple steps in the ERP and just simplifying it, right? Again, back to some of those user experience concepts as well.
I think that's the key word, it's the simplification, right? So when we're looking at areas, often what we're trying to do is understand, are there any bottleneck process, bottleneck parts or process, parts of the process, within what's there. And so in those instances, we're kind of trying to look at, and there's some tooling within Microsoft already brings from a process mining perspective, but even just understanding kind of those touch points. Where are they? Where are individuals sometimes, upset about, or where are there any kind of pain points that we can see? And this is a great example of one of where we're not really doing anything that you can't do in the system, but we brought in such a way that it's greatly streamlined. And so now you're taking a user who is not who's not heavy in the system from perspective, but now they can be really live in their kind of subset of a system and really be able to do everything they need to do here in minimal steps.
Yeah, and I think the key thing here, they can do a simpler process, but then we still enforce all the necessary ERP transactions in D360 behind the scenes, like creating those transfer orders, creating the transfer process, doing the stock updates, even potentially making requests for purchasing further down the line. But again, the user doesn't have to go manually create all those transactions separately. You kind of automate it with the beauty and the power of Power Platform.
Exactly.
I think the last one, kind of related to inspections, but different, we get into gimbal walk, or, this gets into a bunch of different scenarios like this: quality, safety, these things that are done as individual processes that really can create this standardized process. And back to your point earlier, have it be very intelligent and branching logic, and then bring back metrics and visualizations on top of it as well.
Yeah, and this is a great one, especially where we're kind of seeing, even in the the AI aspect of things, of being able to understand kind of, is there any trend, is there any any additional pieces that should be brought to light. But yeah, I think the other key thing here is that we're typically doing is it's all about notifying and making sure that as a reading's kind of going through, there's a lot of dynamic capabilities to where that that individual might even kind of walk, so to speak. As well as to make sure, okay, well, based on certain things, this is what we're seeing. And we can kind of drill into more questions based on how certain things were answered.
Yeah, and back to your point, tying into data or tying into history, right? We've observed multiple times a trending temperature rise or trending variation, of output. Now we can start turning that, insights into action concepts by looking not just one time, but what's happened over the last time to use that as logic and alerting to trigger some action that needs to happen downstream, potentially in the ERP or CMS applications.
Exactly.
So some good ideas and some good concepts there when you get to the shop floor, just things that make sense, that are easy wins. There's a whole bunch of other ones, and then there's different variations of all these you can really dive into that just meet the unique needs of your business that you can kind of tailor and run from there. And the great thing with a lot of these too, Paul, right, there's templates from Microsoft and Power Apps. You can go grab those, bring some of those starting points as a download template, and then you can kind of just, develop until your little heart's content down the path as well. That's a long day for Paul when it's a lot of Power Apps development. I think another great place we talk about back office. These are your very traditional ERP users, your finance and operations and purchasing people. This is usually your most intensive ERP users, right? And they're spanning, multiple areas of the ERP application. And I think the thing here, why it makes a lot of sense is they're also the ones interacting with suppliers, with vendors, with customers. And there's a lot of this back and forth that typically spreadsheets and email, right? Like that's where things go down that path. And it's also the places where you can get a lot of gains. This is, you go back and look at a lot of the ISVs and add-ins for ERPs around invoice scanning and processing. There's a lot of efficiencies because you have a lot of repetitive, high volume activities. And that's a great place to focus for automation, a great place to focus with the Power Platform. So let's take a look at financial processes. This is one we've developed some of our own solutions in this area around payment processing and payment and invoice processing. Microsoft's developed something. The key thing here is when you dig into any of the financial processes, it's the repetitive, it's the volume, it's the scale, or potentially compliance or other audit details. That's what really makes the magic here, is right? Really, Paul, audit not just the Power applications and the interface, it's also all the automation.
Yeah, and I think there's several areas here. We've got obviously within the financial, but whether it's kind of tech support type items or questions or anything that's kind of coming through. What's nice is between Power Platform and or some of the Copilot related stuff. It's much easier now to kind of get these responses pre-generated or kind of recommended to a user to where then they can quickly respond for what's there, and we're really not having to have them kind of jump out of too many systems or kind of search for as much as they typically would in the past to be able to respond and be able to respond accurately and quickly.
Yeah, and I think too, gets back into that last statement around complement, not replace. We're really looking to add additional value, complement or complete, or maybe just tie a process together better that may already exist, in D365 on the finance side. I think next one we look at supplier management. Microsoft is releasing some new functionality in D365 around supplier engagement management. The thing I think it's important here is there's a lot of activities and almost all of them are interacting with an outside party, right? So you get to that email, those spreadsheets, those Word documents. So there's tons of opportunity there just streamlining that whole process back and forth.
Yeah, and this one can kind of come in, kind of multiple flavors or different ways that can be to manage, whether it's it's an internal only app or even an app that actually is kind of accessible via Power Pages. What's really great about kind of Power Platform overall is that you can easily bring multiple systems, but then create one shared view kind of across those. So that's where I think it's a great fit. You can really kind of get that visibility across your applications in such a way that makes sure it's a lot easier to manage, troubleshoot, things of that nature.
I think too, as you capture, you think about the different things of the information you have to capture. Back to your point on that, potentially with Power Pages, self-service, having the suppliers fill those things out themselves, but also just all those approvals. And we look at things that are time-based in the supplier side, like certifications, price lists, things where just a constant reminder of making sure we're up to date and capturing that flow to help drive the users around things that do need to get done as part of the whole supplier management process.
Yeah, whether it's notifying, with 45 days in advance type scenarios or things like that, just to let the engine, or let the system really do a lot of the work. We see approvals, especially kind of coming through Teams internally, is just a fantastic solution that between it and adaptive cards, it's a great way to kind of help streamline things. But there's just so much that the back end application can kind of do for you, even when it's not, the information's not necessarily all in the power or Dataverse. It can be where, hey, we're looking in other systems, we're understanding what's there, and be able to kind of send some of those reminders, notifications, just and approvals, as you mentioned.
Yeah, and that kind of brings to your next point we talked about around automation. And I think as we get through everything, I always joke about, like, what is it, Tuesday today, and it's always time to approve someone's expenses, and automation goes around that. But this is where you get into let the system help support the way people work and really do these kind of trigger-based and streamlined approvals. And back to your point, that the card concept around let people approve in the device they want to approve, whether it's mobile or Outlook, and different concepts from that perspective.
Yeah, Microsoft hit a home run with the adaptive cards. It's kind of funny of where it's sometimes folks will kind of be shocked at how just convenient and easy that is within Teams, because many of us are living in Teams, and so it's just one of those. It's a great way to initiate a process or have something kind of flow your way, and then for you to be able to quickly respond and get the information you need, so you're not having to jump into another application. You can have it all right there. You don't even really have to leave your kind of Teams area.
And this is especially critical when you have people that don't live in the ERP application, people that are just part of a process or part of an approval, versus expecting them to respond to an email or see an email, go look at the email, log into the system, and go down that path. Again, that card concept and using automation, put it in Teams, let them approve it directly in Outlook or via mobile. Again, giving them that ability to kind of help move a process along further, back to this kind of, make it consistent and easy, but also just make it faster, with not getting stuck in a process.
Yeah, that's another, great example of where kind of with that automation engine that you have with Power Automate, even allowing it to kind of look across various systems for a user and say, hey, here are some of the pending items that you have, and just in a clean, summarized email, that really brings is one that our customers love, of where sometimes what happens is they're so focused on kind of their main day-to-day that some of the other items kind of linger until they happen to bounce back into that system or go in that particular area. So there's a lot of great ways of how you can send notifications, either the one at a time that may sometimes need to be, or it can be more of a run once a week, and then just give me kind of a summary of what's going on. Is there anything I need to, an email of where is there any summary of items I might need to jump into and take care of? And this way things don't just kind of lag behind. So you have a ton of flexibility with kind of how you approach your notifications and some of this automation that's there, that I think that there's a lot of great ways to take advantage of it.
Yeah, I think I'm going to ignore the notification to approve your timesheet today, Paul. So FYI on that one. I know we talk about agents and AI and Microsoft's continued investment in that. I think one of the challenges you get into with agents is people think around just bots and traditional things, but when we think about designing agents, there's also how do users interact with agents and how do they perform actions on top of it. And again, building these Power Apps frameworks inside of Dynamics 365 to kind of frame out agents is a great way to deliver and connect users to it.
Yeah, and I think this is a kind of an interesting so much of it when we're kind of talking within AI, we're often people kind of look at it as kind of that ChatGPT experience, or kind of the Copilot experience. And what's nice about this is you can really kind of bring some of the AI experience directly into the app. So whether it's helping on a process, or having something like providing feedback from a SWOT analysis, for example, there's some great ways that you can leverage AI without the user even having to initiate that chat or initiate that conversation. But behind the scenes, it's still providing them kind of the insight and the guidance for what's there. So this is a great example of that. It's actually just kind of coming in, doing some analysis. The user's still in full control. They can then navigate wherever they kind of need. but it is a great way for them to actually say, hey, based on these scenarios, let me actually provide me a couple options that I then can kind of select and move forward with.
And I know, in the screenshot, we've done that in a tariff example where you're going out and reading, the federal tariff updates and evaluating, then letting the user make decisions based on which supplier they should use or which products they should use from basically country of origin to kind of maximize their costs, right? And look at like the right decision making. But to your point, Paul, it's just an interface bringing back, letting AI do some heavy lifting and work and kind of research, but letting them make decision what they want to do on the transaction inside of their ERP. And again,
and minimize their cost or minimize the time it takes of delivery. So, or any kind of combination in between. So it's a great.
Yeah, we see this on RFPs, like you mentioned, SWOT analysis, tariffs, a whole bunch of scenarios where you can use AI, but again, drive it into a decision or an action inside of your ERP system.
Exactly.
So we talked about one of our last things around user experience. One of the number one failure points for any system, ERP, CRM, or really any platform, is user adoption. So one of the things to get into that is like the way people worked in the past, the way they worked, or doesn't model the way the business operates. So when we look at this, it's kind of like, how do the out of the box forms work? Can we create different ways of executing or by basically modeling the system around the way people work? But again, not doing customizations to the system. And again, big part of this is really just driving user adoption. So we wanted to look at a couple of things. I know your favorite, Paul, is definitely the wizard effect, right?
Yeah, and this is a combination of things. Of where one, the Power Apps overall, I think has been great at kind of streamlining input, or bringing a user along, especially across multiple systems. I think it's a great way to simplify a process. And then once you kind of have this, then you can actually look at making efficiency gains at each part along the way. And so I know you've got, we've got this Excel example later that, we've done that many times of where, as it's moving through, you can kind of have the interactions and the different types of forms that you need, for that process that makes sense at that moment. In this case, it's going through and kind of helping on the proposal generation. Key thing is that AI is kind of riding alongside with you the entire time and helping provide certain guidance and influence kind of from really at each step. And so what's nice is based on kind of your history of how what's been proposed in the past, what's won, that kind of stuff. It's actually then helping to look at how information can be brought together in a much more reduced time frame than the typically starting from the last template or starting from scratch or anything like that. It's really allowing to kind of give that full coverage while at the same time bringing in the maximum amount of automation that it can.
Yeah, and I think the great thing here is you're spanning potentially in the back end multiple data entities or multiple transactions, but we're doing it in one continuous flow. Customer onboarding is another great example. We need to add new customers, credit apps. There's all kinds of things that have to happen, but we're kind of doing that in one continuous flow. And it doesn't have to mean one user either, right? Like it can span multiple users through that process. But again, we kind of got the whole transaction flow laid out, and we're controlling where the data goes and the capture related to the process, not the way the system is implemented on the back end. Drives user adoption, tailors it much to the business. And to your point, you have some dynamic flexibility in there to make sure that you're capturing the data correctly and we're not missing any steps. You can have some logic in there around, add this step from past experience, and all that approval and validation on the back end that you can have.
Yeah, exactly. It's multiple agents and it's multiple prompts, right, that it kind of goes through. So, we're having multiple agents to then review what's there, provide kind of any feedback, really does give great insight to what's happening, as well as to your point, allow it to kind of move through both the organization as well as kind of through its process.
Yeah. Does make sense for every process. Does make sense for some key processes or processes that you need rigor around or high volume. So one of the things we touched on this earlier around external partners, whether it's vendors, suppliers, number of different trading partners you get out there, or even customers, right? One of the great things with Power Platform is Power Pages and the ability to actually expose this data directly on the system to external users.
Yeah, and I think this is one that fantastic feedback, from our customers and our customers' customers. Often on there within accessing portals. It's a great for kind of B2B scenarios. We've had many in the past of kind of in that channel partner space who even get involved in kind of how we're building out the portal in a way that is going to be very useful for them, and as well as kind of streamline operations for both, right? And so that's what's so great about what's here is it's different than kind of building your own custom portal that sits there in a separate silo. By building it in Power Pages, you have the ability to kind of connect to your data. You're not that you control in a way that makes it a lot easier to kind of interact with, as well as being able to keep everything from a process standpoint very streamlined. And so I think there's a ton of advantages for what's there, and then of course you can kind of bring some AI components as well that we find are very productive and well received from our clients and clients.
Yeah, and we see again the supplier portal side, vendors, doing that on that side. The customer portals, we see this a lot. It's again different channel, whether it's quoting, orders, product lists, all the things that go manual back and forth. These are great things to expose and have a more direct interaction with the customer. It can reduce call volumes, can reduce email volumes. A lot of good business benefit back to that earlier statement around reducing costs and good impact. And I like to your point around it's not just custom code back in the days where it was a separate application. Now you've got complicated data synchronization. It's really building the Power Apps right on Dataverse and extending that directly from D365 and enabling that in a lot quicker fashion. And again, don't have to do everything. You can start enabling quickly on a couple key things and grow from there. And again, I think Microsoft's continuing to launch. I know the supplier engagement management has some pre-built templates on the supplier side for a lot of the core processes already. My favorite by far on user adoption, I know Joe and the guys on our team that helped build this, is really, we hear the thing, Excel. People love Excel. Processes are better than Excel. And it kind of gets into the cool thing with Power Apps is you have all the Excel functions kind of embedded in Power Apps. And you can really recreate an Excel-like looking application that runs directly in Dataverse. Again, drive that user adoption. Why fight them if they want to live in Excel? If they're going to export your data from your ERP and put it in Excel, why not enable it, but do it in a controlled fashion?
Yeah, and this is what it's funny when we talk about looking for areas. Sometimes we're actually looking for the usage of Excel as something as a way to replace because a lot of times in a system in the ERP, somebody actually exports, does a lot of work, and then kind of re-imports what's there. And Power Platform is often a great solution for that, or where you can kind of bring in some of this information in a way that's a lot easier to maintain. Sometimes Excel is really a great fit, or a subset of Excel. Leveraging Excel along the kind of that process journey is a great fit. And so we see it. Like we just had a recent one around quoting, of where kind of being able to go through and iterate with your quote around, kind of planning out. Works really well, kind of having that Excel component. And so what this is with kind of having that Excel 360, or kind of a tool that gives you that capability. It's really a great way to allow users to kind of have that the interaction that they know and love and are familiar with. And this way, it makes it a lot easier for them to see all the information in a concise manner, and then be able to kind of interact with it the way that they're used to and comfortable with.
Yeah, and I like you can embed this in the D365 UI, so feels like Excel operates, but it's not the disconnected cache versions of spreadsheets and outdated product and price sheets and all the nonsense that happens with Excel. But it still lets them kind of go through an Excel-like process of pricing, and if you do pricing or configuration, lets them have that, especially in project-oriented scenarios where they got people and rates and resources. They want that kind of flexibility of Excel. You can give them kind of the best of both worlds, but still with some guardrails, right, where the data is not just completely offline and out of sync with reality.
Exactly.
So let's move on. There's some good ideas. Hopefully everybody got some good use cases of some things to go look at. We'll talk about some opportunities to go look at here in a second. But I want to kind of transition to how to be successful with Power Apps. So whether you've been developing already or new to developing Power Apps, really want to look at, kind of how to be successful. So we're talking a little bit about best practices for implementation, and then we're going to look at really finding opportunities. So I want to kind of kick off with Paul talking around really app innovation and best practices and kind of roadmap and governance. So Paul, there's a kind of a proven process or how we like to go about doing this, but I know some of this really just starts with, start small and kind of iterate from small incremental wins.
Yeah. Usually coming in, there's a pain point that we're typically kind of being brought in for, or it's migrating from another platform or something, things of that nature. But sometimes it's also ideation, right? And so of where, especially in the AI space, I think that's one that's where people know they want to do something, they just don't know exactly what. And so kind of in that inspiration phase, that's where we're really trying to get feedback, from end users. We're trying to understand, whether it's a customer experience, how that's moving along. Anywhere we're kind of capturing feedback, we're capturing pain points, and we're looking at, what are some of the differentiators either we're doing, or what are some differentiators that our competitors might be doing that we need to actually have a process or a way to kind of compete with. So, and then inspiration phase, we're bringing in a lot of ideas. It's looking at different ways of what can be done. We're kind of trying to understand what is the the difficulty to benefit, things of that nature, and we're really trying to kind of determine what are some potential ways to kind of move forward. Then you get into that kind of co-design. That's where we're actually getting into more of a mock-up type experience, where we're kind of we're having that visual interface. Great on the Power Platform because it's pretty easy to iterate with. Sometimes it's actually just process flows, and we're kind of looking at how things move kind of throughout the organization, and then just to try to identify any kind of bottlenecks that may occur there. A little bit more on the Power Automate space that way, but in that process engineering or process re-engineering phase, it's really kind of focused on looking at data or applications or things just kind of move through the business process. So those are some really key areas of where we're kind of trying to focus on making sure everybody's kind of with us along the way. And so that's why that visual aspect is so important, because when you get those clickable prototypes or clickable mock-ups, that's a great way to kind of interact with and see and then understand, where am I coming from and where am I going towards. That really gives us a great destination that everybody can kind of agree with and get on board with. Then we get into kind of a we'll call it more MVP or minimal viable product. We're trying to really look at how we can get something there and to kind of build from, and then everything from that point is pretty much in the iteration side of things. And so there's a great amount of stuff that we're kind of doing from the platform perspective, that we want to bring in automation. We want to bring in whether it's testing and application lifecycle management. It's all kinds of aspects that we're trying to say, hey, let's make sure that we can continue to iterate. We continue to actually make sure we're getting great feedback. And then you kind of have this aspect of things of where we want to pilot features. We want to pilot, in some of the larger aspects of things. We want to make sure before we go too far in one direction, that we've got a really good feeling that this is going to be or feedback. This is going to be really the right direction for the long term. So what's great about this is it sits really well, like back to your earlier slides, and kind of that cloud platform of how we can be nimble. We can kind of stay with what's there, but then continue to iterate and really make sure we're landing on solutions and answers that are going to lead to long-lasting success.
Yeah, I think the key here, again, that rapid innovation, right? Like get in front of your users, get their feedback. Again, the great thing of the Power Platform is that rapid development and empowering that. And I think a lot of times it's also communicating a roadmap, right? Like back to it may not be the finished product, or everything you want, but we're going to break it up. And I know we've had good success around, like maybe looking, especially on a replatform of a bunch of legacy monolithic apps. Where are we going to start? What are we going to do first? And how are we going to get to all of it over time? you still have to communicate the roadmap and the direction so that users understand when they're going to get something.
Yeah, and bringing that modular, kind of aspect of things. What's great about this is, especially with Dataverse, is that the data can be shared, across the apps, that users who are coming into from a different aspect or area will or can have that kind of subset information that they really need. So you really kind of eliminate the silos. You get the benefit of some of the monolithic aspects of things, of where your data's in such a way, but you then don't have the burden of the monolithic, of where it's so hard to move and keep everything, keep everything improving the way it needs. So we really do try to break things up in a way that we can maximize kind of the build out, so to speak, but as well as to make sure we're getting, great gains for the various areas of how all these pieces come together. So, and previously kind of had that enterprise architect or kind of view. That's what's also important, is that we're kind of looking at how do all these things fit together, what can kind of go when, and what's going to have an impact that's going to actually, drive results.
Yeah, and I think that's good. You still have to start with some foundations and some management of like the end result we're trying to get to, so you can plan that out from a data perspective, but you don't have to wait for the whole thing. Back to your point of, we still got the benefits of some level of enterprise data store, especially when you're leveraging one of the D365 platforms. But we don't have to stop and wait for everything to be done. Like, we can still have fast iterations. And that kind of brings to your last point around, governance matters, right? Like unchecked development, the concept of citizen development run wild without guardrails. And this is true of both Power Apps development and AI and Copilot development. Really putting governance in place up front, after you finish your exploration and your kind of value statements, is a good place to start. And there's some good tools available from Microsoft to help you do this if you've not done it already.
Yeah, there's a ton of power within the Power Platform Admin Center, and then what's so important, I think, for organizations is you want to give your users freedom, especially in the AI space. We find some great ideas are coming from individuals within the company. It's funny, a lot of it's a lot of the folks in accounting, finance, things of that nature, they've got great ideas, and so they're able to build out kind of often a pretty solid almost personal automation kind of aspect within some of the AI, and allowing them that space. It makes it very easy for great ideas to kind of surface towards the organization, that then can be shared and kind of rebuilt sometimes, but build it in such a way that a lot of users can kind of take advantage of it from a productivity standpoint. And so that's what's awesome about kind of where Microsoft has set everything up, of where it's very easy to build out environments in a way that can give users the flexibility to kind of experiment without really having the data risk concerns that are there. So there's a lot of patterns that we kind of follow within what's there. You kind of get the individual, what they can do, and then you kind of if you mature up to kind of more of that department or area level, of where it's not every system, but it's looking at processes, key processes that might stretch across multiple systems, and giving them kind of access there. And then you've got kind of more of the company level, or maybe branch level type aspects that can occur. But you can really kind of give yourself that hierarchical environment set up that then makes it very easy for allowing for experimentation, allowing for the capabilities to kind of, or great ideas to kind of surface, as well as people being able to kind of leverage things themselves that can kind of prove out where benefits can be had.
I think where we've seen customers be most successful with this is really around, they've really adopted that framework. They've got some governance. They have a center of excellence, and they've kind of created the environment of sharing inside their organization, but still in a governed way, but empowering users to take advantage of that as a team together. And that's where you see some fun innovation. We do a lot of innovation in our company, innovation challenges, but still giving people kind of the framework of how to do that and how to share. Exactly. So let's talk about how to find opportunities. We've hit on a lot of things, during conversation of where we've seen success with Power Apps and how to extend ERP. We really wanted to kind of give some feedback of like how to go find ones inside of your organization. So kind of starting off, looking for the manual processes. That's kind of number one. We still seeing, anytime you got the spreadsheets, the smart sheets, these other things floating around, in the ecosystem that are done outside the system, that's a great place to go look at. Paper, we still see paper on clipboards. We see paper in a desk where there's stacks of them that have to be processed and rekeyed. Those things in email. Looking for those opportunities for all those manual interactions is a great place to go look. Now, Paul, I know like there's some automation with process mining tools and things like that from Power Apps to kind of look at ways to drive efficiency, and that can kind of help really look at where automation goes in play, right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, one real quick before we move to the second column here. We've got user feedback, but I also think it's important. We're kind of looking at customer feedback, and so that's another kind of scenario that we typically drive or say, okay, as a customer, if I walk through this process, what does that look like? And those are great ways of where sometimes we might know what an internal status code means. Then that gets shared with the customer, and they have no idea what that is, right? So there's a lot of good areas where kind of looking at feedback both at the user and the customer level that I think is super important. But on the processing mining side, sorry, Martin, that is one where yes, Microsoft actually years ago kind of acquired a great company and folded that into within Power Automate. And it gives incredible insights into what's going on within processes to see where are some delays, and that's crucial for what a lot of what we do is we're all trying to make sure we're getting visibility to see is the problem actually the time it takes to enter into the system, is the problem because it's somewhere lingering to the side, is the problem where is really the slowdown that we can improve, or are we really fast in areas that don't matter and we're kind of slow and or slower in areas that do matter. Those are where Microsoft gives phenomenal tools that let us kind of find certain aspects where we can actually look to see how can we adjust, how can we reprioritize, where can we really make sure that we focus that can bring better experiences for users and customers alike.
Yeah, I think the last thing is really, again, surveying that landscape, looking for those, rogue applications. There's still some legacy Access and InfoPath and Microsoft applications floating around. We mentioned Excel. We'll still see, old, jet form style or smart form style solutions that, you can target that capture data that's valuable, may not live in the ERP. Maybe the output of it creates something in your ERP transaction. But I think surveying those other applications kind of surrounding a process that are disconnected is always a good place to start. So we're going to pause there and open up for questions, and then we'll kind of head to wrap up. Do we have any questions from the audience? We're going to see questions.
Is the audio working?
No questions from the audience. Quiet bunch today. Well, if we have no questions, I want to thank everybody for attending. We hope you got a good understanding of why extending ERP with Power Platform makes sense. It's something Paul and I believe in, and kind of again the smart way to make extensions to, especially the Dynamics platform, really works. We do it with SAP, we do it with other ERPs as well. It's a great way to surround and get value and get better user adoption. Hopefully give you some ideas on some use cases and opportunities, things in your business. And hopefully Paul's feedback on how to build a success plan get you going on your strategy. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to both us on the Tech Lead community and Power Platform community, or to HSO directly. Happy to support, and hope this was very valuable to everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Well, to everyone watching on the live stream, thank you so much for joining us today. We'll be wrapping up soon. Be sure to secure your spot at the Power Platform Community Conference happening October 27 to 29 in Las Vegas. You can register by scanning the QR code on your screen or by visiting powerplatformconf.com. Don't forget to use the discount code BOGO, B-O-G-O, for a buy one, get one free pass. If you'd like to participate in a Q&A live with Martin and Paul, please make sure you join using the link provided in your calendar invite. Goodbye.